What's up, legends? My name is Briggsy and I am the co-founder here at Next Level Production, and today I'm going to be showing you how to take your drums from flat and boring to punchy and exciting by taking you through some different drum programming techniques. So without further ado, get into it. So the first element that we're going to focus on is the kick drum. Now in drum and bass we use what's called a syncopated kick drum pattern, where one of the kicks is deliberately accented to highlight the offbeat. So on our kick channel here we're going to create a MIDI clip. I'll just make it a bar for now. Now in standard house music, the kick drum lands on the 1 every time, so it goes like this. It's called 4 on the floor. And you expect the kick drum to land on the 1 every single time. It feels natural. In drum and bass, what we do is instead of having a kick drum on every beat, we actually remove 2 of the kick drums from the 2 and the 4, and we syncopate this third kick drum here and we shift it to the offbeat. So instead of landing on the 3, it lands on the 3.3. And then it just repeats like that, and that's the standard drum and bass kick drum pattern. Now snare drum. Our snares don't syncopate and they land on the 2 and the 4. This is the classic drum and bass drum pattern where it's kick snare kick snare. Now if you're making jungle, you would remove this kick drum here and you would shift your snare back to where the kick drum would usually land. Something like that. There's a million different ways that you can do it, but the classic kick pattern is kick on the 1, kick on the 3.3, and snare on the 2 and the 4. Right, moving on to percussion now. What we want to do is layer a bunch of different percussive elements on top of each other to fill out the top end of our drum break. So the first element that we're going to put in is a closed hat. And so typically in drum and bass, our closed hats run on an 8th note pattern. So let's grab a closed hat. This one I quite like. So we'll drag and drop this guy in here. Set the grid to 8th notes. And now, what beginner producers typically do is they'll put their closed hats in like this on every 8th note. Let's give this a listen. Just sounds a little bit flat and boring, not really a hell of a lot going on. It's very robotic and it doesn't really have any sort of flair. There's no humanization, it's just very sort of flat and average. And so the way that we can spice this up is we can start to introduce velocity, so we can increase and decrease the gain or the velocity of our sample, so they're not playing at the same level every single time. And we can also remove some of these hi-hats to accentuate different other elements. So the way that I tend to program my open hats is I'll actually take away the open hats that land on a kick and a snare. So we have a kick drum on the 1, so we'll remove that hi-hat. There's nothing here. There's a snare here, so we'll remove that. Nothing here, and there's a kick there, snare there, and then nothing there. So now let's listen to our open hats now, our closed hats now, sorry. So they bounce a little bit more now. They're a little bit more exciting. They're not as flat. They feel a little bit more humanized because they're not just static 8th note hi-hats. And so the next thing that we can do to these to spice them up is we can introduce some velocity. So the way that we can introduce velocity with just audio samples without having control over how hard the hi-hat is actually being played is we can just gain these samples up and down. So there's a few different techniques here. I usually tend to gain down this hi-hat here. It sounds nice going from quiet to loud on this hi-hat, so we accentuate the 3. And then usually on this last one as well. So all of the hats that are on the off beats, so this is on, this is off, tend to sound nice, gained down a little bit. Cool, we'll copy that across. It's quite subtle, but this adds to the overall humanization and groove of the drums. Cool, the next element that we're going to add into our drums here is an open hat. So we're going to come and find an open hat sample. Let's grab, burn these. So they're sort of a bit of a cross between a ride and an open hat. Now let's give these a listen. Help to sort of fill out the top end of our drum break there. Sounds quite nice and full, but we're not done. So the next element that I want to add in here that's going to help with the shuffle is we're going to include an open hat on the 3. So let's go and grab an open hat and we're going to chuck it right there. So we're going to go into Shock 1 sample pack. I'm going to find one. Might actually do a closed hat that has a little bit more punch to it. That one's real wide, so that will probably work. We'll whack that on there. Oh, yeah, that's sounding nice. Let's copy that across. Mix it in, so we'll drop the channel gain down a little bit. Cool, so we've got our 8th note closed hat here, we've got our ride / open hats on this channel, and then we have another closed hat here accentuating the 3. The next thing that we can add is some 16th note shakers or tambourines. Now, which style of drum and bass you're making will depend whether you'll use shakers or tambourines. I'm going to use some tambourines because they're nice and resonant in the top end. So we'll just grab a sample that I tend to use most of the time. This one here. These are a little bit slow because they're not actually made for drum and bass. So let's double time them. Cool, listen to these now. And what we'll do is we'll actually just get rid of this sort of harder hitting tambourine, and we'll just copy these 4 here across like so. And then Command J to consolidate them all. Just going to gain them up. Cool, so now we can sort of see how all these elements are interacting together and they all complement each other. The next element that we're going to add, and arguably the most important of this drum break to make it exciting and to really bring it to life, is the ghost snare. So to make a ghost snare, I'm going to use the snare that we've already got. That way the drum break is going to sound more cohesive because we're not trying to add in elements that aren't already in it and sort of like mold them to work with what we've got. So we're going to resample this by using Ableton's epic new feature, Command C, then paste bounced audio. Boom. So good. Absolutely love this new feature. Thank you, Ableton, for this. So now we've got our, like that. Now we've got our resampled snare here. We want to now turn it into a ghost snare. And so when we're making ghost snares, we need to be thinking, what actually is a ghost snare and how can we replicate it? We need to think about what a ghost snare actually is. So a ghost snare comes from live drumming, and a ghost snare is really just a drum hit that's played not as hard. So we need to try and emulate that by manipulating the sample in a certain way that the waveform would look similar to what it would look like if we were to resample a ghost hit from a live drummer. So when a snare drum is hit not as hard, we don't have as much transient. The snare drum doesn't ring out as long, so there's not as much tail and there's also not as much body. So to create this, what we're going to do is come into the sample, we're going to fade out the transient, and we're just going to cut out section of the body about that. So we've only got really half as much body, as what we did before. And then we're just going to splice these two clips together, like so. And then we're going to shorten this tail right up so it's nice and tight, like that. So it should sound a bit more like a rim shot now. Really nice and tight and short. And then we're going to consolidate this so we've just got the one clip now. Now we've got really nice, tight, snappy snare, as if the drummer's just sort of tapped his snare drum or her snare drum. So now the placement of these. To create that shuffly ghost hit vibe that you get in drum and bass, we need to have it accenting the closed hats or the tambourines. So it needs to land in between where these hi-hats are playing. So we're going to shift it to this section here and this section. So it's playing on the off beats. So now let's give this a listen. You can hear how now with the percussion, it's sort of accenting what these hi-hats are doing. It's going, and that gives you that classic shuffly feel that you get in sort of liquid drum and bass and some of the more ticky neuro styles of D&B. Now you can shift these around and you can try out different variations, different placements. You can remove some of these, so you get sort of like a more steppy style drum break. You can actually remove this one and keep that first ghost note in. You can add more, so we could put one at the end here maybe. Maybe we can put another one here even. Doesn't really work as well. You can mess with the velocity so we can gain some of these down. Helps with a little bit, gives it a little bit more of a humanized feel. Maybe we'll put that gained version down at the end there as well. Cool. So now we've got some really nice steppy drums. Now, this is where we can really start to bring our drums to life. And so to mix these drums together, we want to think about what our key elements are going to be. And so the kick and the snare are going to be the main drivers of these drums. So we want to make sure that they have enough room in this drum break to breathe. And the way that we can do that is with sidechain. So you can notice here how I've got all of my hi-hats in one group. And this is for a reason. So the kick and the snare are going to be sidechained to these hi-hats. So when they play, these hi-hats will duck out of the way. So to do that, we've got a sidechaining plugin called Baraska Sidechainer. If you haven't seen this, I would highly recommend checking it out. It's a free plugin that you can go and download from Baraska's Gumroad. But I use Ringmod Sidechain purely because it's so fast and so accurate that you can't really even hear it happening, but you can really notice how much more present the kick drum and the snare drum are when used, when sidechained to these hi-hats. So if we turn this off and listen, sounds okay, turn it back on. I'll just group these. You can really start, if you've got headphones on and good quality speakers, you can hear, especially in the snare, the top end of that snare has a lot more room to breathe. And that's because everything will be at 0 dB. And so the limiter will be crushing anything that has any constructive interference. So if we turn this limiter on the groups, turn all these limiters off, we can actually see that there's addition and amplitude happening when the kick and the snare are playing. Because they're at 0 dB and some of these hi-hats will be close to, they will be adding an amplitude and actually going over 0. And the way that we can eliminate this is by sidechaining the kick and the snare to our hi-hats. So now watch what happens when I turn on my sidechain. We can see that the kick and the snare now are no longer going over 0 dB. They're sitting in there perfectly because the sidechain is taking care of that. And because it's so fast, you can't even really hear that it's happening. This is really important for getting nice clean drum sounds, especially in drum and bass, because the drums are so fast. We really need each drum element to be coming in and out super nice and quick, and to have its own space to breathe. Otherwise it gets muddy and mushy really quickly. The other thing we need to note is we also want to be taking care of the transients and the attacks of our drums, because if we want nice punchy drums and they're being masked by our other elements that are in the drums themselves, we are really limiting our drum breaks, and they're not as effective as they could be. So yeah, that's how you can create some super spicy, shuffly sounding drums. By using some of these techniques, you can really get a boring, flat sounding drum break sounding really nice and tight. I would highly recommend checking some of these techniques out for yourself. And I hope you enjoyed this video, got some value from it. If there's anything else that you'd like me to go over, feel free to drop it in the comments. Super keen to start doing some more of these long form tutorials. But I hope you got value from this, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.